and a big welcome to Cryptid's Den. If this is your first time here, I'm really glad you found us. And if you're coming back, you already know you're part of the crew. I hope your day's been going well. Tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to give you a proper hello. While you're here, feel free to hit that subscribe button and share your thoughts in the comments. We're all about good vibes and great conversations. Now let's get into it. They say the forest doesn't speak, but last night, it knocked 3 times. Most people fear what they can't explain. But my grandfather taught me something different. Some things in the woods aren't monsters. They're listeners, guardian, watching not to harm, but to remember. When I was 9, one pressed its hand against the window. It didn't growl. It didn't break the glass. It just waited. My name is Silas Wade, and I'm not here to tell you a legend. I'm here because I became part of one. This isn't a story about horror. It's about silence, offerings, and what happens when you stop demanding and start respecting. The forest remembers who honors the old ways, and who doesn't. My cousin mocked them. The next morning, only his footprints remained, and a necklace swaying from a branch. But if you listen, truly listen, you'll be answered. A carved flute with my wife's name in ancient runes. A bracelet woven from pine needles. No power. No Wi-Fi. Just firelight, wind, and breath shared between 2 worlds. If you still believe this is just a story, be careful, because the moment you stop listening, they stop whispering. I thought it was just the wind, sharp and dry as it slipped between the pine trunks, like a breath sucked through clenched teeth. But the wind doesn't pause. It doesn't stop to watch you. And that night, as I sat alone by the fire near the bones of the old Boone family homestead, the wind, it stood still. I had been back to the CRYPTID'S in over a decade. Life had stretched and pulled me away. City jobs, cold apartments, and quieter griefs. But something had shifted. It wasn't a dream, not quite a voice either. Just a pressure in my ribs, a memory that wouldn't stay buried. So I drove all day, down old highways and gravel roads, until I reached what was left of the Boone property. Only the stone steps remained, half swallowed by moss. The cabin had long since given up its fight with time and termites. But the clearing felt the same, like the trees had waited, like they knew I'd return. The air smelled like oak ash and dried pine needles. I lit a small fire from memory, muscle, and instinct taking over where years had worn details thin. The harmonica was still in my pocket. The one Harlon gave me the summer before Grandma Etta passed. I didn't plan on playing it, but my fingers moved on their own, and soon a soft, wavering melody drifted out across the trees. Something he used to hum when the nights grew too quiet. The forest didn't echo the song. It absorbed it. Then something answered, not in melody, but in rhythm. 3 sharp knocks, deliberate, slow, resounded from the edge of the pines behind me. Not branches cracking, not a woodpecker. This had intention. I froze, harmonica still pressed to my lips, the last note stretching thin before dying. I didn't move right away, just listened. The fire popped once, sending a spark up into the dark. That's when I turned. He stood just past the tree line, still, towering. A shape darker than the dark behind him. He didn't growl, didn't rush, didn't even blink. Just watched. I don't know how long we stared at each other. Seconds, maybe minutes. I could see the shimmer of eyes, not red like stories claim, but deep, glossy black, wide and unblinking, reflecting my firelight like glass marbles. My heart pounded, but my hands stayed loose. I knew him, not by name, not by name truly, by face, but by presence, I whispered, more to myself than him. It's been a long time, and as if that meant something, the figure stepped back. Not away, just into shadow. The pine needles barely stirred beneath its weight. No crashing, no The forest held its breath. Only then did I notice the offering, sitting at the base of a moss-covered stone, maybe 10 feet from where I sat. A ring of dried grass and thistle, braided with something pale and soft, rabbit fur, clean, pristine, freshly handled. I rose slowly and walked toward it. No sudden moves, just reverence, like I'd been trained without knowing. I knelt beside it. The scent of crushed mint and earth rose from the leaves beneath. The ring was warm, still held the ghost of a hand that had placed it. I didn't touch it. Not yet. Memories began peeling open like old wallpaper in the mind. Summers in this clearing. Etta's voice calling me in for supper. Harlon's stories whispered on the porch about the shadow men who weren't shadows at all. And my own small feet, once frozen beneath the window the first night I saw him. Years ago, before I had words for awe or terror. That night I'd been not. The air had been humid and thick, insects droning like static. I'd heard something outside, breathing, not wind. And when I crept to the dusty window, the glass had trembled under the weight of a hand. Huge, black fur, fingers like night-thick branches splayed across the pane, not pushing, not pounding, just resting there, listening, feeling. I hadn't screamed, just stared. My chest had rattled with fear, but somewhere deep down it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like I'd been chosen, marked. Back then, Harlon hadn't said much. Only took me deep into the woods the next day, to a flat stone half covered in moss. We left apples, bread, and a jar of Etta's plum jam. No prayers, no words, just the silence of a pack that didn't need explaining. That's how it started. And now, after all these years, after funerals and fires and city noise, I was back. And they remembered. A gust of wind pushed through the trees, sending a rustle through the canopy above. But the clearing stayed eerily still, as if the pines themselves were straining to hear. I turned back toward the fire, the heat now low. Coals glowing red like the last breath of a story still being told. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I sat beside the fire until it died out, the ring still untouched beside me, and the forest never quite releasing me from its gaze. Something had shifted. This wasn't just a return, it was an invitation, and I wasn't sure if I'd already accepted. I was 9 the first time I saw the forest breathe. It was a late July night, air thick with the scent of hay and sweat. The kind of heat that curled the edges of everything, even the moonlight. The Boone family homestead was packed. Uncles, cousins, grown-ups yelling at one another over chores and heat. And who would sleep where? My mother had arrived wearing her silence like armor, and my stepfather had already drained half a flask by noon. But I stayed close to Harlon and Etta. They were the only ones who didn't talk at me. They just let me be. That night, the beds were full. I was laid out on old army cot by the window, the kind with thin bars that dig into your back, but I didn't mind. The bugs outside made their usual hum, and the pine trees whispered in their dry, needled way. I was trying to count the chirps of a katydid when I felt it. A shift in the air, a pull. The kind of pause that doesn't just quiet the world, it drains it. Then came the breathing, low, deliberate, animal but not wild. Close. Closer than it should have been. I sat up, afraid to move but too curious not to look. The glass of the window was smeared with condensation from the day's heat, but through it, I could just barely see a shadow, bigger than anything we had on this land. Not just big, tall, wide. Its shoulders spanned the window pane, and then some. I held my breath. Then the hand came. It moved slow, deliberate, pressing against the glass like it was trying to feel me through it. 5 fingers, thick as fence posts, covered in coarse, dark hair that shimmered slightly in the moonlight. It didn't tap or claw, just rested there. My body wanted to scream, but something inside me didn't. The terror was there, yes, but threaded with something I didn't have words for. Wonder, recognition, as if whatever stood outside had no intention of hurting me, as if it needed me to know that. I couldn't move, couldn't look away. The hand lingered, then slowly lifted, vanishing into the darkness the same way it had come, without a sound. I stayed up the rest of the night, staring at that glass, waiting for it to come back. The next morning, while the rest of the family fought over eggs and who stole the last of the coffee, I walked out to the porch where Harlon sat sharpening a knife. He looked at me like he already knew. I didn't speak, but my face must have told him everything. He set the blade down, wiped his hands on his jeans, and stood. "Come with me," he said. "We didn't tell anyone where we were going. We just slipped into the woods behind the barn, following a path that didn't exist on any map but had been walked 1,000 times by feet older than ours. The light got strange the deeper we went. Golden, but filtered like it was trying not to wake something. After what felt like an hour, we came to a wide, flat stone nestled between two twisted cedars. It looked ancient, like it belonged to the land before we did. Harlon knelt, unwrapped a cloth bundle head brought, apple slices, fresh cornbread, and a jar of Etta's plum preserves. He placed them on the stone carefully, like he was laying out a meal for a guest who might not show. I stood there, silent, unsure. He said nothing for a long time, then finally looked up at me and said, "You saw him." I nodded. He nodded back, almost proud. "Then it's time you understood." That's when he told me about them. Not monsters, not beasts, Watsila, he called them, using a word from a people who'd lived in these hills long before we carved roads through. The Watchers, the Old Ones. A people, not animals, who kept to the deep woods and spoke not with words, but with presence, with gifts, with silence. "They're not like us," Harlon said. "But they've been here longer, and they remember." We stayed there until the sun began to dip. Nothing came. No sound, no movement. But Harlon didn't seem disappointed. He packed the cloth back up, leaving the food behind. "That's the point," he said. "We don't leave it for them to see. We leave it for them to feel." Back at the house, the mood had soured. Carson Maddox, my older cousin, was yelling at Harlon, claiming he saw something hulking through the trees like a damn gorilla. And if Harlon didn't put up fences or get rid of whatever the hell's living back there, he'd call the county. He stormed off, red-faced and puffed up, while my stepfather and a few others chuckled, as if fear was a punchline. I watched Harlon as it all unfolded. He didn't raise his voice, didn't defend himself, just listened, eyes dark with something I didn't yet have the age to understand. But I do now. He wasn't angry. He was tired. That night, as I lay in bed again, the heat broken by a sudden cool front, I kept staring out the window, wondering if I'd see the hand again. Instead, I saw eyes. 2 of them. Low to the ground at first, then rising, not glowing, just catching the moonlight like polished stone. They didn't blink. They didn't come closer. They watched, then turned and vanished. Years later, I'd learn this was their way of showing trust, of saying, "You saw us, and you didn't scream. You didn't run. So we'll show you more, if you're willing." I didn't sleep that night either. But I didn't need to. Some things don't live on clocks. Some truths you carry like a burn. You don't sleep them off. You learn to live inside them. I used to think Harlon told stories to pass time, to fill the silence between chores and summer storms. But after that night by the window, after that breath of fur and shadow pressed gently to the glass, I started to wonder if maybe the stories had always been waiting for the right listener. We were sitting on the porch a few days after it happened, the 2 of us watching thunderheads stack up on the western edge of the hills. The cicadas were going hard, and the barn cats curled under the steps like they knew the heat was about to break. Harlon had his usual tin cup of sweet tea. One boot kicked up against the post, and he looked at me in that sideways way he did when he had something that needed saying, but didn't know how to start. "You ever hear your grandma talk about her mama's people?" he finally asked. I shook my head. She was part Cherokee. Her mother grew up near Spavinaw in the foothills, way before highways, back when folks still listened to the trees instead of cutting them down. I didn't know where he was going, but I knew better than to interrupt. They had names for things we forgot how to see, he said. Eyes still on the storm. Things that ain't animals but ain't quite people either. Not like us, anyway. Older. Smarter in some ways. Simpler in others. They don't write. They don't build. But they remember. And when they mark someone, they don't unmark them. I felt a tightness in my chest. Like he was describing something I hadn't yet accepted was real. Or maybe something I had but didn't know how to name. When your grandma and I bought this land in '55, the woods were loud. Not just with animals. Louder than that. Things moved where they shouldn't. Chickens disappeared. Eggs crushed, not eaten. Our hound, Deke, the meanest damn thing I ever owned, wouldn't go near the tree line after dark. Just sat shaking under the porch like the devil was out there breathing on him. I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, because now was hearing more than I ever had. Harlon didn't talk like this unless he meant every word. I didn't believe any of it at first, he said. Figured it was coyotes or kids messing around. But then I saw one. Full daylight. Up past the ridge, 8 feet tall, easy. Covered in black fur but not shaggy, more like a horse's coat, shiny in the sun. And its eyes, they weren't animal eyes. They were watching, measuring. I felt like a trespasser in my own woods. The wind shifted, carrying the first scent of rain. Ozone and dust and distant electricity. I went to talk to an old man down in Stillwell. Cherokee elder. Told him what I saw. He didn't laugh, just nodded and said one word. Watsila. He said it slow, like it had weight. Like it wasn't meant to pass between teeth lightly. They're watchers. That's what it means. Keepers of boundary lines, of stories. If you respect the woods, they let you be. If you feed them, they remember your name. And if you harm them, even by accident, they don't forget. I asked what he did after that. His answer came like a whisper. I brought them something. The next morning, we went hunting. Harlon shot a young buck. Clean. Quick. We field-dressed it by hand. Not a machine, not a sound louder than the work itself. He carried the carcass on his shoulders like he was bearing something sacred, and we walked back into the woods, deeper than we'd gone before. To a spot he said they'd be watching. He tied the deer by its legs to a crooked sycamore and stepped back, raised his hands like someone offering peace to an unseen god, and spoke into the trees. This is for the ones who see. This is for the ones who remember. Then we left. No waiting. No cameras. Just silence and sweat and the feeling something had shifted in the soil. That night, the wind came back wild. Not a storm. Just air moving like it had a mission. Branches clattered. The old weather vane spun hard enough to scream. Then, near midnight, came a sound I'll never forget. 3 knocks, deep and slow, against the cedar wall behind our room. I shot upright. Harlon was already awake, sitting at the edge of his bed, not startled, just listening. That's them, he said. Over the next weeks, things changed. The chickens returned to laying. The eggs stayed whole. The woods grew quieter, but not empty. Like a watchful calm had settled over the land. Every month or so, Harlon would leave something out there. Sometimes meat, sometimes jars of Edda's preserves, sometimes just a bundle of herbs tied with twine. In return, we'd find tokens left on the porch. Feathers braided with strips of leather, perfect pine cones arranged in circles. Once even a small bird skull polished smooth and set in a knot of wildflowers. None of it random. They're not giving us gifts, Harlon said once, turning over a bundle of twigs bound in a shape that looked like a symbol. They're speaking. One day I asked if I could be the one to carry the basket. He looked at me, real long and real serious, like he was trying to see something in my eyes that only they could see. Then he nodded. The next morning, I carried a woven basket of bread, jam, dried meat into the trees. My legs trembled the whole way. But I didn't stop. I placed it down on the flat stone beneath the sycamore and stepped back. The woods said nothing. No wind. No birds. Just the breath of trees. But I felt, and I swear, before I turned to leave, I caught the faintest sound. Low, guttural, distant, not a growl, a greeting. Something had seen me, and maybe it approved. I hadn't been back to the stone in over 20 years. Not since Harlon's hands grew too shaky to carry the basket himself, and he passed the ritual to me without ceremony. Just a quiet nod and the kind of look that weighed more than words ever could. Now, I stood there again, full grown and hollowed out. My boots sunk into the mossy edge of that same clearing, my breath fogging slightly in the early autumn chill. The basket in my hands was light. 2 jars of plum preserves, 3 strips of smoked venison, and a square of cornbread wrapped in linen. Rowan helped me pack it. She didn't ask questions, just kissed my shoulder and said, "Bring back something good." She meant peace. I hoped that was still possible. I knelt and set the basket on the flat rock like I'd been taught. Not quite prayerful, but respectful, in that bone-deep way you hold your breath when stepping into a graveyard at dusk. The trees around me whispered with wind that didn't quite touch the ground, high and thin like it had someplace else to be. I stood still, waited. Not for a sound exactly, but a sense. That moment when the air feels like it's thinking. And just before I turned to leave, I felt it. Something watching. Not the threat kind. Not even the curious kind. The remembering kind. I walked back to camp slow. My truck was parked a half-mile down the logging road. Far enough not to disturb anything. The fire I'd built earlier had reduced to coals, warm enough to toast my palms. I sat there for a while, fiddling with the harmonica in my coat pocket, letting the quiet wrap around me. Then it came. A soft hiss of movement behind me. Leaves, maybe, or breath. I didn't turn right away. I knew better. Movement made them pull back. So I waited, eyes fixed on the firelight dancing in the blackened ring of stones. The sound came again, closer this time, not footsteps. Something dragging lightly across bark. I turned slowly, nothing. But the basket I had left. It was there, just outside the ring of firelight. Not the same basket, but one that looked like it had been woven by hand from strips of cedar bark and willow, still damp from the night air. Inside, a dead quail, headless, clean. 3 perfect blackberries. A coil of sinew tied with a knot I didn't recognize. I stared at it, pulse thudding in my ears. It hadn't been there a minute ago. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. Something moved in the trees. Not forward, not away. Just slightly to the side, as if repositioning for a better view. I could almost feel the outline of it. Tall, broader than any man I'd known, and still. No snarl, no threat, just presence. The kind of presence that doesn't need to announce itself. It just fills the world around you, I whispered. Thank you, and didn't expect a reply. But from the dark, a low, short exhale, like air pushed through a throat not used to shaping words. It wasn't mimicry. It wasn't human. But it wasn't empty either. It felt like acknowledgement. Then came the silence again. Thick as fog, pressing in. That night, I dreamt of fire. Not violent, not wild. Just the steady glow of heat and pine. And standing beside it, him. Or one of them. Watsila. His eyes were like stones wet from river water, and when he lifted one hand to his chest, palm flat, I knew what it meant. I remembered Harlon doing the same. It wasn't a greeting. It wasn't goodbye. It was a pledge. I woke up cold and sweating, the dawn bleeding through the trees like a slow burn. Years ago, Carson Maddox had laughed when Harlon spoke of the Watchers, called them forest freaks. Said someone needed to go out there with a shotgun and clean the bloodline. The next day, he went missing, vanished somewhere between the pond and the barn. His footprints stopping dead beside a pile of snapped branches. No signs of struggle, no blood, just his chain, a silver cross he always wore, found days later hanging from the limb of a maple, bent in a way no storm could explain. We never found him. And no one ever searched harder than Harlon, but he never once asked the woods to give him back. That was the year Harlon started waking up at night and walking to the porch alone. Etta knew. She'd get up and sit with him, never speaking, just holding his hand. Some mornings I'd find small things left on the step beside him. Feathers, rocks. Once, a wooden carving of an owl with no eyes. He kept them in a box under the floorboard. I found it after he died. But that came later. Right then, in the cool hush of the Wakita morning, I stared down at the woven basket and felt something shift in me. Not fear, not awe, something deeper. A sense that I had crossed back into something that never stopped waiting, something that never forgot me. And the strangest thing was, beneath the unease, beneath the old ache of memory, was a quiet warmth, like I had been seen, fully, and not turned away. I didn't take the basket. I left it there, untouched, the same way they had once left their gifts for us. Because some things aren't meant to be exchanged. They're meant to be understood. As I packed up camp, I paused once more at the edge of the trees. The light had changed, filtering through the canopy like stained glass, soft and old. I felt eyes again, not hostile, not inviting, just watching, just remembering. I nodded once, hand on my heart, and somewhere in the distance, the forest exhaled. It started with her breath. Shorter, shallower. The kind of rhythm that doesn't fill a room anymore, only makes you realize how quiet it's got. Grandma Etta had always been the strong one, sharp as a thorn, warm as cornbread, stubborn as stone. Even when her knees gave out and her fingers curled stiff from the arthritis, she still cooked, still sang, still left out gifts for the woods. But by the time the air turned cold that October, she was mostly bedbound, the light in her eyes flickering like a candle near the end of its wick. I was 17 and still dumb enough to think strong people don't break. But one morning, the house just felt wrong. Too still. I stepped into her room and saw her chest not moving. Just her lips, slightly parted, like she was about to whisper something, but didn't get the chance. Harlon didn't say a word. He just stood there holding the bedpost with both hands, head bowed like he was listening to something only he could hear. I don't know how long he stayed that way. When he finally turned to me, his eyes weren't wet, but they were emptied out, like the tide had pulled something from him that wouldn't come back. We buried her out past the creek where the dogwoods bloom first in spring. No funeral, just the two of us and the trees. Harlon placed her favorite shawl in the earth with her, the one with the embroidered feathers. He didn't speak. I wanted to. I wanted to say something that would sound right or holy, but I didn't know the language for this kind of goodbye. That night, the porch light flickered once and went out. The power stayed on. Just the porch. And when I stepped outside, something was waiting. A small pouch, tied with sinew and set gently against the wooden boards. I picked it up slowly, fingers trembling. Inside were 3 polished stones, turquoise, bright, and cold. Too smooth to have come from our creek. Too perfect to be random. I turned around, scanning the tree line, but the woods were empty. No breeze, no sounds. Just the heavy hum of something watching. Something mourning. Harlon saw the pouch in my hands and didn't ask. He took it, turned it over once, then brought it inside and set it down beside the tin of old offerings in the cabinet drawer. He sat down at the table after that and didn't move for hours. Just sat, Etta's coffee cup still on the windowsill, her scent still in the blanket on the couch. But the house felt like it had grown bigger overnight. Too much space, too many shadows. In the days that followed, Harlon changed. Not drastically, not all at once, but the small things unraveled first. He stopped playing the radio in the mornings, stopped humming while shaving, stopped setting out offerings at the stone in the woods. I asked him once, after I came in from the trees empty-handed, why we weren't continuing it. His answer came quiet. They already know, but that silence didn't last. About a week after the pouch appeared, I woke to a sound I'd never heard from the woods before. It wasn't the usual knock or call. It was aching. like a cry pulled too far through the throat. Long, low. It rose and fell in waves, not loud, but thick. So heavy it pressed against my ribs like grief made audible. I stepped outside, the sky still black, stars smeared behind clouds. And in that darkness, I felt it. Not presence. Sorrow. Like the trees themselves were mourning with us. I stood there, barefoot on the porch, eyes stinging, and realized I was crying. Not for her. Not just for her, but for something bigger. Something older than either of us. A connection stretching back through time, knotted now with loss. When the sun came up, I walked out to the old sycamore where we'd always left the baskets. The moss was damp, morning light cutting through the mist like slivers of stained glass. And there, beneath the stone, something new. It was carved from cedar, worn smooth by time and touch. A figure, simple and small, about the size of my palm, but unmistakably her. The slope of her shoulders, the twist in her braid, even the pattern of her shawl, etched faintly in tiny notches. Someone, or something, had made this, had watched her, had remembered. I brought it back to the house and set it on the windowsill beside her cup. Harlon came in a few minutes later, paused mid-step, and stared at it. He didn't touch it. Just looked. His jaw trembled once, then stilled. And then he sat down and poured himself a cup of black coffee, like he used to. Like he hadn't in days. He took one sip and whispered into the rim. "Thank you, after that morning." Things settled, not back to normal. Normal had died with her. But into a rhythm, I took over more of the farm work. Harlon spent more time out back, sometimes walking into the woods for hours, sometimes just sitting on the porch, watching the treetops move. We didn't talk much about it, not because we were hiding anything, but because there wasn't much to say. The forest had its own way of speaking. Some nights, I'd wake to the sound of something outside. Not close, but not far. Sometimes it was that same sorrowful call, rising low and vanishing before it fully broke. Other nights, just a rustle, like something too big to be wind moving gently through the brush. I never tried to chase it, never even turned on the light. I'd just lay there and listen. It was enough. But one night, I swear this on every breath I've got left, I felt a hand on my shoulder. Not heavy, not cold, just there. I didn't move. I didn't need to. Whatever it wasn't warning me. It wasn't testing me. It was standing beside me. And for the first time in weeks, I slept easy. Like something out there had taken up the weight we couldn't carry alone. Some losses leave a hole. Others become a doorway. And once you know where it leads, you can never pretend the forest is just trees again. Harlon died the way old trees fall. Quiet. Slow. And all at once. One morning, I found his coffee cup still full on the porch table, the chair beside it empty. The screen door creaked like it always did. But there was no weight behind it. No footfall echoing after. I called his name once. Then again, no answer. I walked back to his bedroom already knowing what I'd find. He was lying in bed, hands folded on his chest like he was holding something that couldn't be seen. Eyes shut, face calm. There was no struggle. Just stillness. That kind of final stillness that doesn't belong to sleep. I stood there longer than I should have. The silence felt too big to speak into. We buried him next to Etta beneath the dogwoods, the ones that bloomed like ghosts come spring. I carved his name into the wooden cross with my own pocket knife. Didn't need anything fancy. He told me once. Names don't matter to the trees. They just remember who fed them. The dirt settled soft over him. The wind moved the branches gently overhead. No birds sang. I didn't cry until after dark when I sat on the porch where I used to sit, knees pulled to my chest like I was 9 again, and the world had outgrown me. The fire happened 6 days later. No storm, no lightning, just a curl of smoke at dusk. And by the time I ran up from the lower field, the entire structure had become a skeleton of flame and ash. I tried to fight it at first, grabbed a shovel, threw dirt, screamed curses into the rising heat. But it was no use. The roof collapsed inward like it was bowing to something. And the strange thing, the part I couldn't explain even later, was that the fire didn't spread. The dry grass surrounding the cabin should have gone up like kindling, but it didn't. It stopped at the tree line, like the forest itself had drawn a line. I stood there as the fire died, smoke curling around my boots, waiting for something to move in the trees. Nothing did, but the silence felt heavy, protective. After that, I couldn't leave. I tried. I packed my truck 3 times, drove down the gravel road halfway to town, but my hands would sweat on the wheel, and some weight would settle behind my ribs. It wasn't duty. It was something older. I started sleeping in the canvas tent I'd set up near the old barn foundation. Each night I'd light a fire, keep a journal, wait. Some nights, there were sounds. Branches breaking, not sharp, but slow, deliberate. Sometimes a smell, wet fur, cedar smoke, something earthy and strong. I began to speak out loud into the trees, not knowing who was listening, only knowing someone was. And sometimes the air would shift right after, like a breath drawn in. Then came the voice. It wasn't loud. It didn't come through my ears. It came behind them, settled in the back of my skull like a memory that didn't belong to me. It wasn't words at first, just shape, tone, sadness, curiosity. Then, finally one night, I heard it clearly. Not a language, not English, but I understood anyway. Jerry, gone, but you, still here, Jerry. Harlon's name, not the one people used, but the one that must have been spoken into the trees years ago, when he first laid that deer across the stone. They remembered. They still remembered him. I froze, not from fear, but because of how gentle it was, like a call to prayer you didn't know you'd been waiting for. I looked up into the black beyond the firelight and whispered, "Yes, I'm still here." That was when I started bringing offerings again. Not every day, not like clockwork. I followed instinct. Some weeks it was bread, other weeks smoked meat. Once a harmonica tune I played slow and off-key by the fire. They never came close. Not visibly, but... Not visibly. But things began to appear again. Arranged pebbles, a pine cone dipped in mud and laid carefully beside my cot, a feather I couldn't identify, long and silver gray, left on top of my boots one morning. But one week, I forgot. I'd gone into town to get supplies. Lost track of time. When I came back, the clearing felt off, tilted somehow, like the light didn't fall quite right. That night I heard something scrape across the side of my truck, not harsh. Not aggressive, just deliberate. In the morning, there was a mark. 3 parallel grooves, each almost a foot long, carved deep into the metal near the back wheel. Not random, not vandalism. A warning. I stood beside it, hand hovering above the grooves. The metal was cold, but the message was clear. Don't forget us. I walked back into the trees with nothing but a jar of jam and my own breath, left it on the flat rock, and said nothing. Just lowered my head. That night, the air turned soft again. The pine needles stirred like they were being stroked by invisible fingers. A weight lifted from the back of my mind. Not forgiveness, but hasn't stopped since. Some nights the voice returns. Other times it's just a hush that settles over the clearing when I speak. I don't ask questions. I don't expect anything in return. This isn't a deal, it's a relationship. One I inherited without asking, one I carry now without burden. Because the truth is, I don't think they ever wanted worship. Just remembrance. Now when I walk the woods, I carry nothing but what I'm willing to give away. And I never look up unless I'm ready to be seen, because sometimes, when the wind dies and the fire burns low, I swear I can hear a second breath echo mine. Still here. Rowan didn't grow up in the woods. She wasn't raised on ghost stories and tree lines. Didn't spend her summers chasing shadows or listening for names that don't belong in human mouths. She came from the flatlands, from highways and storefronts, and the kind of quiet that gets piped through vents and locked doors. When I told her about the land, about what lived there, about what remembered, she didn't laugh. She didn't pull away. She just listened, brow creased like she was tracing each word into the air between us. She said she wanted to see it. I said she should be sure. She said she was. Zoe packed 2 baskets, one with the usual offerings: sweetbread, dried apple, a small jar of blackberry jam I made myself, just like Etta used to, the other with things Rowan picked out on her own. A strip of blue ribbon, a candle that smelled like cedar and smoke, and a folded piece of paper I didn't read. She said it was private. I didn't ask. The hike-in was quiet. Not the nervous kind, just the kind where everything feels like it might mean something. Leaves underfoot, sun slicing through the pine needles, her hand in mine, and the weight of the basket swinging between us. When we reached the clearing, she stood there for a while, not speaking, just looking around like the trees were waiting for her to introduce herself. I let her lead. She stepped to the flat stone, knelt without ceremony, and placed her basket gently in the moss. Then she stood back, hands clasped in front of her like a child at a grave. I could see her lips move. I couldn't hear what she said, but the wind did. The clearing shifted, subtly. Not a gust, not a sound, just a pressure, like the woods had taken a step closer. That night we made camp near the edge of the clearing. No fire, just a lantern and our backs against the mossy ridge. She asked questions, not out of doubt, but out of reverence. About Harlon, about Etta, about what I heard in the trees and what I hadn't told her yet. I answered what I could. Some things I didn't have words for. She didn't press. We fell asleep curled into each other, the breath between us shallow and warm. Sometime after midnight, I woke to the sound of branches swaying with no wind. Not crashing, not cracking, just motion, coordinated, rhythmic. As if the forest were dancing in place. Rowan stirred beside me and sat up. Her eyes were wide but calm. She said, "They're happy we came." I didn't ask how she knew. I could feel it too. The woods didn't just feel alive. They felt awake, vibrating with a kind of low joy that didn't need noise or shape. Just motion, just presence. Then came the soft knocks. Not 3, not 4, dozens, scattered, like distant drums played by someone who didn't know they were being heard. I squeezed her hand. She didn't flinch. At dawn, we found the gift. Laid at the edge of our tent was a bracelet woven from thin cords of fur, soft and gray, braided tight and knotted in a spiral that looked ancient. Alongside it, a flute. Small, carved from some kind of bone or hollowed wood, light as a feather. Mouthpiece was wrapped in bark. Across the side, etched in shallow, deliberate strokes, was a symbol I didn't recognize, but Rowan did. She traced it with one finger, smiled faintly, and said, "It's my name." I drew this on the paper in my basket. Her voice broke on the last word, and she looked down like the forest had written her name back to her. She played the flute later that evening, seated on a stump just inside the ring of trees, her legs folded beneath her, eyes closed. The notes were uneven, breathy, but they didn't need to be perfect. The woods listened anyway. The air around her shimmered. Not literally, not with light, but with something just as visible to anyone who's ever known the weight of being seen. That night, she dreamed of one of them. She told me the next morning, voice low, still heavy with sleep. She said he was tall, towering, but not monstrous. His eyes weren't eyes, just depth, like looking into bark that's watched generations pass. He placed a hand on her shoulder, then her chest. Not pressing, just still. Then he turned, walked into the trees, and was gone. She didn't say what she felt then. She didn't need to. I saw it on her face when she woke. Not fear. Not confusion, but acceptance. A kind of quiet awe that changes how you walk through the world. We didn't speak for a while after that. We just packed up slowly, folded the blankets, extinguished the last embers of the fire we hadn't lit, and made our way back through the pines. Halfway down the trail, she stopped, turned, and whispered something I didn't catch. I asked her what she said. She shook her head and smiled, just saying thank you. That night, back at the edge of the foundation where the cabin used to stand, we stood in silence as the wind stirred around us. The old dogwood still leaned over the graves. The porch was gone. But I swore I could still hear the screen door creak in the dark. I placed another offering by the stone. Rowan added a second one beside it, a small ring made of twine and thread, still warm from her hand. I didn't ask her what it meant. Some things don't need telling. Some things get answered in silence. And in that silence, I felt something rise. Not from the ground, not from the air itself, but from the air itself. The kind of presence that doesn't just fill space, it opens it. When we lay down that night, the stars above us looked sharper somehow, brighter, like they'd stepped a little closer just for us. She turned to me and said, I think they always did. And neither of us spoke again until the morning came. There are no fences now, no power lines, no satellite dish creeping over the trees, just the clearing, open and clean, the grass thick from years of wild return. Where the cabin once stood, we laid the first beams of a new one. Smaller, simpler, made with our hands and no blueprint but memory. Rowan and I work slow, not out of laziness, but because some things aren't meant to be rushed. You build different when you know the ground is watching. We don't keep cameras out here, not even our phones. The idea of pointing a lens at the trees, of trying to capture something that never asked to be recorded, it feels wrong, feels like betrayal. One time Rowan brought a sketch pad instead. She sat by the creek and drew lines she didn't explain, symbols that looked like the ones we'd seen carved into wood or left in stones. When I asked what they meant, she just smiled and said, "They're not for us. We're just holding them until someone else is ready." I still eat baskets, once a week, maybe twice if the feeling's strong. There's no schedule, just rhythm, like tides or breathing. Sometimes it's fruit, sometimes meat. Once I left a single pine cone tied with red thread. The next morning, it was gone, and in its place was a ring of feathers, small and soft, bound in mud that smelled like cedar and rain. They don't come every time, not in the way folks expect. No figures looming in firelight, no glowing eyes behind the trees. But you feel it. The way the wind folds around you just before a whisper, the way a stick breaks behind you without sound, like it's snapped in your memory, not your ears. Some nights, Rowan and I sit by the fire without speaking, letting the flames draw breath between us. And when the fire dies, sometimes, not always, there's a hush that settles in the clearing like a blanket pulled gently over the shoulders of the earth. I don't think I was ever meant to tell this story in full. Not the way people usually tell stories. This isn't proof. There's no map, no coordinates, no moment you can rewind and say, there. That's where it happened. Because it didn't happen in a moment. It happened over generations, over bread and blood and silence, over names spoken with care and homes built with intention, over the kind of remembering that doesn't need photographs to last. Harlon never left instructions. No written will, no letters, just habits, just hands that taught mine how to move wood the right way, how to wrap herbs in cloth, how to listen to wine that wasn't made by weather. His legacy isn't what we kept. It's what we kept doing, and now it's mine. Ours. I've seen people online talk about things they think live in the woods. They talk about monsters, threats, things that lurk and stalk and scream. They chase footage. They chase fear. But they're not listening. They don't understand that fear isn't the only language the forest speaks. Sometimes the woods mourn. Sometimes they celebrate. Sometimes they some want to see if you'll come back, even after everything is burning down. Rowan told me once she hears music in the trees, not with her ears, but in her ribs. A low hum, almost like breath through a hollow bone. I felt it too, when we lay on the porch of the new cabin, backs pressed to the old floorboards reborn. It vibrates under us. Not loud, not clear, but constant. Like something deep beneath the soil is still singing. We don't talk about leaving it anymore. Not because we're stuck, but because this place has folded itself around us slowly, like moss creeping up stone. And it doesn't let go with force. It just waits, patient and knowing, until your roots stretch into it. And then you realize there's nothing to go back to. Nothing worth more than what you've been given here. The dogwoods still bloom early. The creek still runs cold. The pines still whisper when they want your attention. And once, just once, I swear I heard Harlon's voice when the wind rattled the stovepipe. A low chuckle, short and sure, like he was proud but didn't want to admit it. Some mornings I wake up before the sun and walk the edge of the trees, coffee in hand, barefoot in the dew. I don't look for signs anymore. I don't need to. The forest isn't a thing you chase. It's a thing you answer, a call you step into, barefoot and open-palmed, ready to carry what came before you. If you came here, you might not see anything at all. You might spend your days thinking it was just trees, just wind, just old stories that should have stayed buried. But if you stayed long enough, if you listened, you'd know. You'd feel it in your bones, in your breath, in the way the silence starts to hold you instead of press in. I've stopped calling them watchers, and the truth is, we didn't find them. We just finally got quiet enough to remember they were always here. And when the fire burns low, and the night falls thick and warm, and the wind runs its fingers through the branches above, I whisper back, still here. Some stories don't end. They simply become part of the land that carried them. They settle into the silence between trees, into the breath of wind that moves without warning, into the stillness that feels like something is listening, because maybe something is. This wasn't a tale about monsters or fear or proof. It was never about what can be captured, categorized, or controlled. It was about what remains unseen yet deeply felt, about the spaces between generations, where memory lives not in words or photographs, but in ritual, in kindness, in quiet acts repeated long after anyone remembers why they began. Sometimes what we call wilderness isn't empty. It holds its own kind of wisdom, one that doesn't shout but whispers, one that doesn't demand but waits. And if we meet it without greed, without noise, with nothing but open hands and a willingness to understand, it answers, not with spectacle, but with presence. There are places in this world that will only open themselves to those who approach without wanting to take. Places that ask for respect, not belief, for reverence, not conquest. And maybe that's the heart of it. Not everything needs to be proven. Some things just need to be honored. So if you ever find yourself walking under pines that hush when you pass, or sitting near a fire that seems to burn a little warmer than it should, maybe pause. Maybe listen. Maybe listen. Maybe leave a piece of bread or a song or a memory. And then walk away, not expecting a return. Because the most powerful connections are the ones made with no expectation. Only faith. And faith, in its truth, in its truest form, doesn't ask to be rewarded. It simply continues. Thank you for sitting with this story, for choosing to feel instead of judge. If something in these words stirred you, if it reminded you of a place, a person, a silence you carry, please share your thoughts below. We'd love to hear what stayed with you. And if you'd like to walk deeper into stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and follow. Sometimes the story isn't finished. Sometimes it's just waiting for you.